Welcome to Herd Around the Barn, where we talk about farmed animals, about food, and about changing the world one bite at a time. I'm your host, Kathy Stevens, founder of New York's Catskill Animal Sanctuary, where hundreds of animals experience what love feels like every single day. Each Wednesday, we chat with a leader in animal rights or in plant-based health and nutrition, or an everyday hero doing their part to make the world a more compassionate place for all of us. Thanks for tuning in. And now let's get moving. I'm going to tell you a story that's a little embarrassing. When I learned that the iconic movie producer Keegan Kuhn, who's known for his game-changing films Cowspiracy, They're Trying to Kill Us, What the Health, Milked, when I learned that he had teamed up with Joaquin Phoenix, who's not only a world-renowned actor, but also a committed vegan activist, to produce a film called The End of Medicine, I actually thought, oh my God, they've made a film about how plant-based living is so good for us that we're going to reach a point where most of humanity doesn't even need medicine. Hooray! Boy, was I wrong. Stick around to learn about this important film, which is being released just a couple of days from now. So I know how busy you guys are working to promote this film and just to do good work for the world. So thank you, Alex and Alex, for joining us at Herd Around the Barn.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Alex, let me start with you. You snagged an incredible list of producers, including Keegan Kuhn, who I'd put at the very top, who is a producer of some pretty extraordinary films. Cowspiracy, They're Trying to Kill Us, What the Health, most recently Milked. We had the star of that film on the podcast. And of course, Joaquin Phoenix. How did you snag those guys? Did you just ask and they said yes?
Well, basically, me and Keegan had been talking for a little while about some other projects, and for whatever reason, they didn't come off. And Keegan proposed this idea to make this film. So it was his idea, and I didn't really know anything about the subject matter. And so I went away and did some research, and that's when I became really anxious to make the film, because I just couldn't believe this information wasn't common knowledge. And then as we got into making the film, which of course touches on pandemics, a pandemic actually happened, so it became a bit of a weird one. As a result of that, I think Rooney and Joaquin they were in the very early stages of pre-production on a film, basically looking to explore the same theme, and they heard about what we were doing and they said, let's just join forces, basically. And we were, of course, not going to turn that down. And we sort of took it from there. And then they were just like really, really like helpful the whole time. They weren't just kind of producers who come and just stamp their name on the project. They really like watched every draft of the film and gave ideas. And of course, amazing working with Keegan as well, because his previous work had such a big impact on me personally. So to be working with him on this is that whole team, and of course including Alice, has been a bit of a dream, really.
Yeah, I bet. And if anybody has not watched any of those films, we will probably list all of them in the show notes, in addition to The End of Medicine, because they are truly game changers. He's just a phenomenon. As you alluded to, this film was really eerily sort of prescient. It begins with a doctor in February of 2020 talking about how the medical community fears that there's going to come a time when a virus can't be contained. And then March hit and the world changed forever. Yeah. What impact did COVID have on the making of the film? Any decisions that you made with the film?
Yeah, so it had a huge impact, really, because we didn't want this to become a COVID film, because we thought there's going to be a lot of COVID films, and we didn't set out to make a film specifically about one virus, but we of course had to touch on it. It was kind of like, well, how do we now talk about this subject in a way which has to be now a lot more sensitive, because it's something that's happening here and now. So it changed the dynamic of the film in that sense, but also in the sense of like practicalities of just making the film, because of course we couldn't go and film in some of the places that we'd intended to film, and things like following the journeys of people in hospitals and doing a bit more globetrotting with the film. Obviously that was just off the table because of the pandemic, basically.
Alex, did you start with Alice in mind as your lead, sort of? How did you two get involved in working together?
Basically, you guys interviewed many other people, and I was sort of near the end of that. But one of the other interviewees sent over, I think, one of my speeches or something to Alex, and they interviewed me, and then it kind of evolved from there. But I'll let Alex pick that one up.
Well, yeah, basically, Alice was just going to be in the film for about 4 minutes or something like that. And then the more we watched Alice's interview, the more it became obvious that she needed to play an integral role in the film because her story is just that powerful. And obviously, she's such a good communicator. Finding Alice was the bit that gave the film its structure, really.
Yeah, sort of that narrative thread. So Alice, people don't know this yet because they haven't seen the film, but you share your very, very, very powerful, heart-wrenching story from starting out as a vet, working with pigs, and winding up as a vegan activist. It will not spoil this film if you share it with your audience. So can you just tell us a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So my whole life wanted to be a vet and kind of went through all the farm training, went to vet school, and then I spent 4 years after graduating as a pig vet, so working in the meat industry here in the UK. And about halfway through that 4 years, I became vegan myself, and then obviously went on to leave the industry and speak a lot about my experiences, or as much as I possibly can.
So not everybody knows, because it's too painful for a lot of people to watch the films, to watch the undercover videos. Can you share, because this is not visual, can you share some practice or some unique experience that was just too much for you to take?
I mean, I've got so many stories. I could write a book, really, but I think probably one that's really stuck with me would be, I remember I went to visit a farm. They had about 9,000 pigs. It was a big finishing farm, so like 100-kilo pigs. And we were going around, and it's really hard to kind of look into every pen. It's full of hundreds of pigs in each pen and really assess them. But I looked into one, and I just spotted this pig at the back of the pen, and I was like, there's something wrong here. So I hopped over into the pen, and all these other pigs were sort of fussing around it. And sorry, I shouldn't say it. That's really bad. This is, whenever I talk about it, I drop into like livestock vet mode.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So I went over to this pig and I touched him, and he was really cold and just had this sort of staring look in his eyes. And I thought, well, maybe he's had his leg or something. So I tried to get him up and roll him. And I rolled him, and what was underneath him was like the entire contents of his abdomen, like all his intestines had come out, because he'd had an umbilical hernia, which is really common in particularly sort of factory farming, where we've genetically modified animals to grow at such ridiculous rates, and we handle them so much, pick them up by one leg and it weakens the abdominal wall. So these hernias are really common because they're in sort of, factory farm environments or dirty environments with concrete floors and stuff. They rub on the floor and then they can rupture, and literally what happens is that just everything comes out, and all the other pigs sort of start eating them while they're still alive. And I was just sort of standing there, and I yelled to the farmer to go and get a gun, and I was just like trying to bat off these other pigs while this poor freezing cold, like in shock pig was just there dealing with it. Yeah, that's and
you had to shoot, and you shot him.
Yeah, and I shot so many pigs. I was shooting pigs on a daily basis because there was always something like that. I can pick the odd story here and there, but there was always something that was
there's no disabuse us of the fact that of the notion that maybe there's humane euthanasia on these factory farms.
I mean, probably the euthanasia is the only humane thing you can do for them at that point. Like it sounds ridiculous, but to actually put them out of their misery was probably the thing I felt best about. Almost.
Of course, but the farmer doesn't want to pay for the euthanasia solution so that the pigs quote unquote go to sleep. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a bullet.
It's a bolt gun, sometimes a free bullet, but mostly, I carried a bolt gun and like a screwdriver, because you have to then pith them, which is like you put the screwdriver or a metal rod or something in the hole that you make in the skull and kind of sugar it about in their brain. to kill them properly. So that was like my daily life, doing that sort of thing.
This might be an obvious question. Do you think that your work with pigs on pig farms hastened that vegan journey? If you were working with companion animals, would you be vegan today?
I don't think so. No, I came from like a really rural, farmy background. I ate so much meat. All my family ate so much meat. And I really, I'd worked on a pig farm before university, and I just sort of thought, oh, it's not great, but maybe I can do something about the welfare situation. When I work in the industry, I wasn't prepared for like how widespread the just unimaginable suffering was. And I think just it really hit me hard. And I kind of, it took me a while actually to go vegan because it was so ingrained in me. But yeah, if I
as it is with so many of us,
of course.
Yes. Alex, the film showcases a lot of experts, including a couple that we've had on the podcast, Aisha Akhtar and Amanda Hitt of the Food Integrity Campaign. I imagine that when you went to these people, asking them to appear in the film must have been pretty validating. Any stories you want to share?
Yeah, I think most people who have knowledge of this subject are very frustrated that this knowledge isn't widespread, and they really want to do anything they can to help with any medium that's going to get this information out there. So what I found was actually people on this side of the argument were very ready and very willing to help the film. People on the other side of the argument, almost impossible to film with them. Government departments.
Of course.
People like that. You know, we didn't want to make a film that was going to stitch anyone up. So we were very clear with what our aims were with everybody who we approached to interview. We didn't want to do that thing where you turn up and shock someone and put them on the spot. We wanted to say, you know, given your best chance, what is your response to this? And we just couldn't get a look in with a lot of these places. And I thought that was very telling, actually. I think not appearing in the film at all actually speaks volumes, and it gives us the answers that we were looking for in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yes. And just in case folks don't know, I was naive enough to believe when I saw the title, The End of Medicine, I said, yes, this is going to be a film about how veganism takes over the world and nobody needs medicine because everybody's healthy. And it is not that. So because we haven't even said what it is, can you just tell us in a couple sentences what the theme of the film that everyone will watch after they listen to this podcast is?
Yeah, sure. So basically, the film is about how our consumption of animals and our treatment of animals is causing all sorts of major health threats. Chronic disease, pandemic risks, of course, infectious disease. The one the title kind of refers to is the one that most people and experts are most fearful of, which is anti-microbial resistance, which is, of course, is not just a problem to do with animal agriculture, but is massively exacerbated by animal agriculture. I mean, 70% of the world's antibiotics are used within farmed animals. And as a result, antibiotics are losing their potency to be able to fight these bacteria. And, you have people like Professor Dame Sally Davis, who is the former chief health advisor to the UK government, saying that, she considers this to be a threat potentially even greater to the human race than the one posed by even climate change. And yet no one is really talking about this stuff. And I find that absolutely bizarre. And so that's why we wanted to make the film, because we believe whether you're vegan, whether you're not, everybody has a right to access this information, which currently no one's putting out into the mainstream in the way in which they should be.
You're absolutely right. And the idea that our medication will no longer work has got to be pretty terrifying to anyone listening. You include footage from both the US and the UK. Have either of these countries taken any steps to prevent widespread antimicrobial resistance? That's a mouthful. AMR.
That's why I say AMI.
So just a bit of background. The US uses currently 80% of its antibiotics in livestock, which is a massive amount. The UK is at about 30%. So
yeah, and explain to people who might not know why we do that. Right. On the surface, yeah. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. The number of animals that are farmed is obviously a huge number in the US, and also the way that they're farmed. So it's majority factory farmed, and the conditions are such that often we need to keep them alive with medications like antibiotics. The other thing is it's not banned in the US to use antibiotics as growth promoters. So if you give antibiotics at a low level, it makes them grow faster, but it's also absolutely perfect for selecting for resistance, because you're giving the animal a small amount of antibiotics, not enough to kill bacteria that would be pathogenic, but enough for the bacteria to be exposed to them and then learn how to evade being killed by them. So it's a disaster situation. But yeah, that explains kind of the huge amount. And then in the UK, we've put some focus on lowering our use, but what that doesn't translate to is using them properly still on farms. So, for example, in the pig industry, 96.5% of antibiotics will go into feed or into water. So like mass medication to big groups of animals who, some of them might not be sick. There will be many different pathogens circulating. You might not be able to test which antibiotic will be effective to start with. So it might be exposed to a couple of days of one antibiotic, and then you have to change to another. So the use of it is still really, really dodgy in these systems. And actually, this last year or two, I've been trying to bring a legal case against the UK government regarding human health risks from factory farming and antimicrobial resistance is a big one of those.
And when you're done with that one, you want to come over here and
yeah, I mean, I do communicate actually with vets and kind of various people over there, and it's such a big thing to do. And realistically, the UK government have dismissed it so far and managed to get it thrown out.
So how much of this resistance, and that you can make this argument that government, they're not forward thinking, they're not proactive, certainly haven't been proactive around climate change. How strong is the influence of the lobbyists, the pharmaceutical lobbyists, for example, in this case? Those are the people you approached, Alex, and you said they absolutely would not appear on film. Is it more powerful than we could possibly imagine?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of money that goes into lobbying and government handouts each year is absolutely staggering. We're having a lot of the decisions made not by the public, but by these big corporations that have the money to just sway policies, which means that we're not getting policies that are based on science and data and human welfare and animal welfare. We're getting policies that are just based on whatever lines the pockets of these political parties, basically, which is a really dangerous position to be in.
Yeah, like you said, very much like the climate change situation. We've known for like 40 years that we need to be stopping using fossil fuels, yet at the latest gathering of world leaders on climate change, COP26, the largest delegation were the fossil fuel industry. It's like that's how in bed fossil fuel, big ag, big business, big pharma are in with the government and
with the policy
anyone
makers
in power. Exactly.
Yep. We're threatened by avian flu at Catskill Animal Sanctuary in upstate New York, and we just spent $50,000 to keep our birds safe from the poop and the mucus of migrating birds, because that's how it spreads. Can you talk a little bit, Alice, about how factory farming leads to pandemics? Because I don't think it's an obvious connection for everyone, and why, the second part, why we need to be concerned about avian flu or some other virus that begins in farmed animals, even though it's only right now affecting birds and not everybody cares about birds.
Yeah, avian flu is so bad this year. I think it's increased 460% on last winter's outbreaks in the UK alone. So factory farms, in terms of risk of disease, they have absolutely the perfect conditions. They have highly stressed animals with sort of lowered immune systems. There are many animals in close confinement, both dead and alive. You always get dead animals. You always get animals that have sort of open body cavities. Like I told you about the animal with the guts out, there's cannibalism, there's all sorts of like horrific risk factors. And then you've got this interface between humans and animals that you wouldn't ordinarily have, like in natural settings, where you're in the same airspace, very, very contaminated airspace. You're breathing in everything that those animals are breathing out. And then you go to the slaughterhouse and you're opening body cavities, and you're, you then go on to consume these products. So there are so many ways that disease is kind of increased in these settings. And then when you look at the viruses themselves, there's already a lot of zoonotic disease. That means like diseases that can pass from animals to humans, like avian influenza, like swine flu. And in factory farms, or, in big farm settings, you have so many animals that these viruses have like loads and loads of chances to learn. They have so many immune systems to work out how to evade the immune system or spread more quickly or jump species.
That's interesting.
It really increases the rate of potential mutations that could cause us issues. Yeah, and then you go from there. You've got this unnatural interface between people and animals. And then farming itself, like you're looking a little bit more broadly, farming is the number one driver of deforestation and sort of habitat loss. So you've got a massive encroachment into wildlife, into wild species. And then again, you get an unnatural interface between species of animals that wouldn't normally be anywhere near each other.
I like how you talk about, I've never heard anybody talk about a virus in terms of having intelligence and what do viruses do? And you didn't use that word, but that was implicit in what you were saying. And I think that's useful for people. What does every living organism want to do? It wants to survive. And so it's constantly trying to work out how to get stronger and spread more quickly. That was very useful. Thank you. Do you anticipate that it's just a matter of time before avian flu jumps to humans? Did you think it's inevitable?
Yeah, so just this week, there's been a case in China of a new strain. Well, it's not a new strain of avian flu, but it's never jumped to humans before, and it just has in China this week into a 4-year-old boy. There was a spillover in the UK as well from avian flu to a man here. And it happens all the time. We don't hear about it unless it becomes like a really big thing. So spillover events in recent years have reached a mortality of about 60%. So there have been places where...
mortality rate of 60%, what does that mean? 60% of humans who contract?
Yeah, 60% of humans who have contracted it have died, which is obviously enormously scary. It just so happens that virus hadn't got the mutation to spread really quickly from human to human. So what often happens is you get the virus or a bacteria, whatever pathogen, passing from animal to human, and then it stops in that one person and doesn't spread on. But where it learns to spread human to human is when you get pandemics like swine flu and, all the other pandemics we've ever seen.
Let's talk for a little bit about some of the choices you made, Alex. One thing that struck me as somebody who watches these films every time a new one comes out, you touch on so many aspects of animal agriculture, from the extreme cruelty to animals to employee mistreatment, without ever getting too graphic. Can you talk a little bit about how you made all those sort of high-level directorial choices about tone and how broad to be, about which experts to include, things like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, in terms of graphic imagery, a lot of people say, I would have watched this film, but I'm scared to watch it, or I feel like it's going to be too graphic for me. And some of the films I've made in the past, people have said, I really liked that it wasn't graphic. And then I went and showed my daughter or my son, my family member, because I felt like they weren't going to be afraid of it. So I knew I didn't want it to be gruesome, because I didn't want anyone to turn off and not get this information. But obviously you've got to still show people what's going on and give suggestions. And so you've got to sort of work out where that line is that you've stepped over or you haven't stepped over. And some people, I think some vegans will probably say, oh, you should have shown more. You could have gotten away with being a bit more explicit with what you showed. And some people will say, I felt that was too much for me, but I've had to kind of figure out my own line. And so far, everybody who's watched it has said they didn't feel that it was graphic. So I'm really pleased about that. In terms of like the experts that we've included, we wanted to just make sure that we had a really broad range of people from all walks of society, from that sort of top level right down to people who are actually working every day in these conditions, who are the ones who are sort of closest to these problems. And we didn't want it to feel like, oh, it's just coming from a certain type of person. Do you know what I mean? And so the diversity of interviews was really an important thing right from the beginning. And we wanted everybody to be able to watch the film and see themselves within at least somebody in the film. And so we've tried really hard to do that.
Yeah, you did a great job. I loved the scope of the experts, and I loved Alice as a sort of narrative thread, as how I'm referring to you, Alice. I hope that's okay. I'm a writer, so yeah. So the film is titled The End of Medicine, and the title refers to a time when medicine doesn't work against whatever has been introduced by animals. What are your recommendations, either of you, for reversing this terrifying prospect that we're already experiencing, or are we too late? Are you optimistic on this question, or are you pessimistic? Are you somewhere in the middle?
I am somewhere in the middle. I swing between the two. I think on this particular issue of antimicrobial resistance and preventing another pandemic, we really do have a shot at getting to that stage. Like if we act now, really like quite dramatically, the antibiotics that work now will continue to work for a longer time, you know, and we can put ourselves in a position where we're at much lower risk of pandemics in that way. I'm a little bit more pessimistic about the environmental side of things. There's so much work to be done there. But I think what kind of we hope from the film, and I think Alex has done a brilliant job of this, is to empower people to a certain extent, that all these sort of major interlinked issues, like all these huge crises facing humanity, are interlinked, and they are very controllable actually by the general public if we realize our power as a consumer to actually just say, oh, I don't want to keep funding that. You know, it's not like fossil fuels.
Isn't that the truth?
I can stop eating this. I can stop paying for leather. I can stop paying for cosmetics tested on animals. You know, there's so many ways that we exploit animals that put us at risk. We can simply just not buy those products.
And the world would change.
Yeah.
Quite literally, the world would change. Absolutely. Alex, you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, along the similar lines, you know, we wouldn't have bothered making the film if we had gone past this point that it's beyond hope. And so what I hope is that people come out of watching the film feeling empowered, like Alice said, and feeling like actually, as big as these problems seem, we do have the power to be able to do something about that as individuals, and not pinning hopes on governments and hoping that these big organizations are going to change, but actually recognizing that we have that ability within ourselves. And I think that is the sort of takeaway message from the film, is that we spell out all of these issues because everybody needs to know about them. And yes, they are very daunting and scary, but there's some quite clear avenues that we can go down to avoid a lot of these terrible implications going forward, basically.
You know, I come from a family who, for the most part, doesn't want to know. Don't tell me. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to, like, for the most part. There's some exceptions. Any sort of suggestions about what kind of sales pitch or elevator speech we who want to spread the word can use with people who are otherwise going to be reluctant to watch the film?
Like with your own family, it is 10 times harder than speaking to strangers, I think, though I have made some inroads. My mum and my gran are now vegan, and it is hard in your own family. I recently read a book called Change of Heart by a guy called Nick Cooney, and it's basically about the human psychology of social change, and I'd really recommend people read it. I've just finished it, and it was eye-opening because there's so many things that are like counterintuitive in trying to persuade people to do something or like bring them around to your point of view. So that's a bit more of an abstract answer. But on this one, I just think highlighting that this will affect everyone. Like there's no that happened in China, it's not going to affect me. Yes, it is, as we've seen with COVID. Climate change is going to affect everyone. And it's now, like, we really need to do something now to save ourselves as a species. It's so vitally important, but I do struggle to communicate that without like losing my mind.
I bet. Alex, any big premieres or screenings you want to highlight that we can invite our legislators to, as well as our audience?
So basically, we don't have any big screenings planned because we just wanted to get this out there as quick as possible to absolutely everybody. And so everyone in the US and Canada can pre-order the film now and then watch it on May 10th on Apple and iTunes and a few other places.
Great.
And people who live in other parts of the world, if you go to At the End of Medicine on Instagram or Facebook, we'll be posting regular updates on there. And we hope that basically we can get this out worldwide pretty imminently, really.
Okay, May 10th, Apple and iTunes. Great.
Yeah.
Great. Alice, you went from vet to activist. You have a Patreon page. What is it?
Oh, thank you. It's patreon.com/vegan-pig-vet. And all
Vegan Pig Vet.
Yeah, my Instagram is also vegan pig vet. Thank you.
Sure thing. This has been interesting and informative and fun and a privilege. Any closing thoughts from either of you?
We've really tried to make the film in such a way that it's not patronizing. We're not saying, oh, aren't you terrible because of your current habits. We're just trying to give people the information in a way in which is engaging, and I hope people really connect with that. And kind of tying into the question you'd asked previously about how to communicate with people who might not be responsive to this sort of messages, to try, I always try and in my films speak to people in a way in which they don't feel like you're kind of accusing them of anything, but actually you're just including them and bringing them on this journey. And that's why Alice's story is so great, because I think she's someone who's really relatable and people will find a connection with when they watch the film, whether they're vegan from the starting point of watching the film or not.
Absolutely. As we often say here, when people come down the driveway, we're all just trying to feed ourselves. We did not know what we were participating in. You guys, thank you so much. What a privilege. I wish you the best of luck. We will share everything there is to share in terms of promotion in our show notes, and hope our paths cross one day. But in the meantime, thanks a million. Good job. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, we hope you'll subscribe, share it with friends, and review it wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about the work of Catskill Animal Sanctuary, or to book an in-person visit or a stay at our beautiful bed and breakfast, go to casanctuary.org. Have a beautiful day, and see you next week.